Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. This video came out of a discussion that we were having in the Napoleonic Wargaming Discord server. Now if you're not a member of it or you didn't know anything about it, then it's available to those who've joined the channel. Now next to the subscribe button down there's a little join button. By joining the channel you not only help the channel grow, but you also will get access to the Discord server. And in this we were having a discussion. Someone was asking what is the minimum number of units that you need to play Black Powder. Now, obviously the answer would be 1, but that wouldn't necessarily give you a Black Powder experience. Let's put it that way. It's a bit of a pretentious way of putting it, but I think we all know what I mean. So the discussion had 2 or 3 different answers, but I thought, you know what, I think this would make a really interesting video, and I'd like some discussion with you guys, and maybe we can come to some ideas about how we can downscale our Black Powder games. Now, you know me, I absolutely love my humongous games. The Waterloo the Greatest game is without doubt the best wargaming experience I've ever had. And one day I'm going to put on the Battle of Aspern-Essling with every battalion on the tabletop. But that's for the future. So, but at the moment we're looking at reducing the numbers of battalions that we need to play the game. Now, I'm going to talk in this video about scale, and when I talk about scale in this video, I'm not talking about 6mm or 28mm or 1/72 scale. I'm talking about the scale of battle that we're fighting, because obviously the easiest thing to do would be to say, well, you can still have, you've got a box of, say, Austrians, so you've got 48 figures in that box from the Perrys, so I'm going to have a battalion is made up of 6 figures, so yay, here I've got 8 battalions, so that lets me have a game. Well, I mean, yes you do, if you base them in 6s, but it'll help you with the mechanics of the game. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not going to give you the full Black Powder experience, in my opinion, because part of Napoleonic Wargaming, certainly for me, and I know it's there for a lot of people, not everyone, but a lot of people, is the spectacle of the game. So you do want a few figures on the table, but you don't necessarily want to have all the figures on the table, if that makes sense. So how do we get to the happy middle ground? Well, first off, we have to discuss what Black Powder is designed for. If we're going to change the fundamental design of it, we need to know where we are starting from. So Black Powder is what's called a divisional level game. Now, there are loads of different levels of games that you can play out there, and the forces that you command can represent anything from a platoon right up to the Grande Armée. If you're playing on hex games, it can be the entire Empire of France. But Black Powder is very much set as a divisional commander. It also has elements of being a brigade commander in there as well, and it even has elements of being a regimental commander. Now, if you're unsure about what the difference of these is, I've done a video called From Company to Corps. I'd suggest that you check that out first before you watch the rest of this video. And the reason for that is that I'm going to be using some terms here as if my listeners know what I'm talking about, and they can be quite confusing. So if you've not watched that one first, then go and watch that and pop back here. So if you've already seen that one, or you're already fairly confident in understanding what the different terms represent, then let's get into it. So division is made up of a number of brigades. Now, I know in the Prussian army it was very different, but the principle was the same. They just had different titles. So let's take the French army as an example. Now, as always, when I'm talking about the French army, I'm not just talking about the French army, I'm talking about anyone that used the French system. So that would include the Italians, the Westphalians, the Saxons, the Bavarians, anyone like that. This all uses the same system. So you've got a division that's made up of 2 infantry brigades. I'm assuming we're talking infantry here. So a division is made up of 2 infantry brigades. Each brigade is made up of 2 regiments, and each regiment is made up of 3 battalions. So in order to have your division level army ready to rock, you're going to need to have, this is doing maths live on camera, which is always good, 3, 6, 12 battalions of infantry. Which is, that's not a bad size to have a finished army. I would say that's a small finished army, if that makes any sense. 12 to 18 battalions of infantry, maybe 3 regiments of cavalry, 3 to 6 regiments of cavalry, and some attached artillery. That's probably going to be a finished Black Powder army there. You're very, very rarely going to go into a situation where you say, let's play Black Powder, and you've not got enough figures to play a game of Black Powder there. But the struggle really is getting to that size force finished. If you're anything like me, I mean, I enjoy painting the figures. I should say I enjoy having painted figures. So in order to do that, I need to paint the figures. Now, I don't actually mind the process of painting. I find it very relaxing. But I paint the figures so I can play the game. If someone said to me, sit down, here are 1,000 Austrians that you've got to paint before you can roll a single dice, I'd be like, I'm alright, thanks, I'm out. I need to get the games in, and that gives me the enthusiasm and the excitement to start buying, collecting, and painting the next formation. And the best way to break down that divisional force is to turn it into a brigade force. In my head, I imagine it's a little bit like a dial. So you start off at platoon, and then as you turn the dial up, you go platoon, company, battalion, regiment, and so on. So we've got the setting on divisional. We're just going to click it back one, and we go to brigade. Now that means that you, as the general on the tabletop, so the CNC model that now represents you, that is no longer a general of division, it's now a general de brigade. Now, the set of rules, general de brigade, is a brigade level game, as the name would suggest. So they are out there, but we're talking about using Black Powder for brigade. So if we've knocked the size of the game down one notch, and the brigadier is now the CNC, then the lower commanders, what were the brigadiers in a normal game, they now become our regimental commanders. So here we've kept the same size of units, so we're still using those 24-man battalions, or 36-man battalions, or 48, whatever it is, but we've just got fewer of them on the tabletop, which means that we can get those games in a little bit quicker. This is particularly a good system if you're using a Russian army, actually, because the Black Powder, the Clash of Eagles book has separate rules for using units from the same regiment. So it's actually built into the Russian army there. But the idea is that instead of having a brigade order, you would have a regimental order. The mechanics would still be exactly the same. So you still say the 1st Leger is going to form line and advance one move, or whatever, and that would be the 3 battalions that make up the 1st Leger. So it's the same mechanics, just scaled back a little bit. And the same can be true with cavalry as well. Instead of commanding multiple regiment-sized formation, you could be commanding a regiment and having the general figure that commands your cavalry as a general of cavalry. He can instead be the colonel of the regiment, but the different units are in fact just the squadrons of that one regiment, or it would be more common to have 2 squadrons operating together, particularly for the Austrians. So the key thing here is that we've kept the units the same size. They're still going to be, say, 36 figures or 24, but we're using less of them, that's all. The advantage of this is it means that we still get the full mechanics going on, and we still get that look on the tabletop of large regiments with their flags as well. And I think this is particularly important if we're just collecting those units. But for me, it's something that I do when I'm painting the British. I really like the individuality of the units. They've all got the different facings, they've got their standards, all that stuff. And I don't really like to say, these guys I've painted up as, for argument's sake, the West Kents. But now they're going to represent the West Kents and the Green Howards, for argument's sake. I'm just making up units now. But, they're not the Green Howards, they're the West Kents. I've painted them up to be the West Kents. So it allows you to still keep your units intact. It still allows them to be what they are. It just means that you're instead of playing with a dozen units on the table, you can just play with 6 or 7, basically. It's also a really good way to break down your collecting into manageable chunks as well. So you can say, instead of collecting this division, we'll use a British example as this. So my division turns out to be the fighting 3rd, and instead of collecting the whole division, I can just collect 1 brigade at a time, and then I can get that sorted before moving on to the next one. It's about having these small and manageable goals, and it means, for me anyway, as I said earlier on, I'm someone who gets motivated by playing the game. It means that I can get that enthusiasm injection halfway through collecting my army, and it really spurs me on to finishing it off. So going on to the tabletop, why is it important that we scale this back? Why don't we just play it as normal, but just have less units on the table? Well, the reason is we want to get the full Black Powder experience. I've said that a few times. It makes me cringe every time I say it. I just can't think of a better way of putting it. Basically, what I mean by that is to understand the rules, the mechanics, the things that make the game uniquely Black Powder. So let's take the orders as an example. I think that's probably the most obvious one. You can normally give brigade orders with one of your brigadiers, and he gets a reroll if the CNC is in range and he fails his order. So far so good, fantastic. Now, if we reduced the number of units to just say 6, and we still had brigade commanders, but they're now commanding, brigades of 2 or 3 units, then it'd just be a little bit silly, wouldn't it? It'd just be, well, my brigade order is I'm going to attack with 2 battalions. Well, okay, it just doesn't look right or feel right on the tabletop. But if you can say, well, my brigade commander, that's me on the tabletop, the CNC, he's going to get his colonels to order their regiments forward, their regiment being made up of 2 or 3 battalions, then that can work a lot better. Especially as at its core, there are a lot of rules in Black Powder that are more brigade-based anyway. So, for instance, it would not be necessarily, I mean, it could be, but probably not the divisional general's job to decide what formation his units fought in. That's kind of below his pay grade, to be honest. His job would be to say to his brigade commanders, right, I want 1st Brigade to assault the enemy on the hill, and I want 2nd Brigade to form upon the left, and I want 3rd Brigade to perform a sweeping flanking manoeuvre on the right, something like that. It will be up to his brigade commanders to disseminate those orders and to get his troops to the formations that would be best suited for the terrain, etc., etc. So there is part of that in the game anyway, and by clicking down the scale by 1, just so we have it as a brigade commander, it just plays a little bit more into that. And to be honest, it makes it that little bit, and here's a dirty word for a lot of people when it comes to Black Powder, just makes it that little bit more realistic. So this isn't the world's most complicated video. It's gone on for 12 minutes so far, and it's basically 12 minutes for me to get to the conclusion that the minimum number of units to play in Black Powder really is around about half a dozen, I would suggest. I think you could possibly get away with as few as 4, but I think any less than that you'd be stretching it a little bit. You still want to have, an experience of a Napoleonic battle. You don't just want to be, I've got 1 battalion and that's it. It was interesting in the Greatest Game. A lot of people were very scared of throwing away their commands. Now, admittedly, I had the largest brigade in the French army. So, I mean, that may have had something to do with it. Actually, I think I might have had both the largest brigades in the French army. But anyway, I had some large brigades. So for me, it was less of a concern to throw those troops away and get them broken. But I know a lot of people were really hesitant to send their troops in. And that's because they were put in the roles of brigade commanders rather than divisional commanders. So by leaving it at that larger scale, it meant that it was the orders system of Black Powder became a little bit, what's the word? Meaningless is not quite the right word, but it became less important to the game as a whole. And the success of that event was very much based on the strength of the combat mechanics rather than the orders. Again, though, that's my experience of it. I was heavy fighting right from the get-go. So had I been maybe on the right flank, the French right flank, it would have been a very different story. Or maybe the more aggressive parts of the British army. But I can only go from what my experience there was. But yeah, no, so around 4 to 6 infantry battalions, I would say, is probably the minimum. I would go for 2 units of cavalry. One's not really going to get you the full experience. And I'd go for 1 or 2 batteries of artillery. It's basically what I suggest in the start collecting videos. I think that gets you to a good place where you can start playing those Black Powder games. So that's it really. Please let me know in the comments what you think. Would you rather play a smaller scale game, so a brigade game, or would you rather just split your units up and have a division but just made up of units of 12 figures or 18 figures? I'm not saying one's right and one's wrong, but for me, I think it's better just to scale it down 1 click. But that's in, please let me know if you guys would prefer to see smaller units, but more numbers of them. If someone was just starting out, what advice would you give to them in order to get their figures on the tabletop and get playing as soon as possible. But I look forward to reading your ideas in the comments below, and I will catch you guys next time.